Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new video in the introduction to the finite element method. And of course, we're going to be covering a first course in the finite element method by Daryl L. Logan. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about frame equations, and we have an example we want to deal with and show. So the example I have for you here is taken from the book Daryl L. Logan. We have a frame here which is basically made up of two elements, element number 1 and element number 2. And you can see element number 1 connecting node 1 and 2, as well as element number 2 connecting node 2 with 3. Node number 3 is fixed, and node number 1 is fixed. Element number 1 is at 45 degrees. What does he want from us? He wants you to solve the frame. What I will be doing extra is I will be drawing the shear force diagram, the axial load diagram, and the bending moment diagram of that frame. With that being said, let's dive into it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Alright, so the solution of this example is going to follow our typical pattern. Now here we have, of course, to do something called the equivalent nodal forces. You have a distributed force here, and we know from previous videos that I will link above that WL square over 12 is the equivalent moment of that force, and WL over 2 is the equivalent force of that force. Meaning, if I have an element like this between node I and node J, and a distributed force going down of load W, then it will be translated into a force going down here with a value of WL over 2 and a value of WL over 2, as well as a moment going in this direction, which is clockwise, and in this direction, which is counterclockwise, having a value of WL square over 12. This is called the fixed end moments, which is basically an inversion of the reactions you would get if you have a double fix beam under given loads. The inverse of this reaction is going to be your actions. The derivation of this is based on something called the work equivalency method, something that I've explained or hinted to, I guess, in the previous videos. All right, so of course we're going to use WL square over 12, but notice the sign here and the sign here. As you can see, you have a negative here. The reason why you have negative is because, once again, I want to remind you, the finite element method sign convention is up for y, right for x, and counterclockwise for moments. Your moment here goes clockwise, so its value is negative. Your moment here goes counterclockwise, so its value is positive. Your two forces going down, so your value is negative. Those are the equivalent forces at those nodes based on the distributed force. Of course, you can see it in graphical form on the right. Okay, so now we go, of course, into our normal procedures. The normal procedures is basically to find something called the local stiffness matrix. We basically have an element stiffness matrix local, which is basically the addition of a truss stiffness matrix plus a beam stiffness matrix. If you have a really keen eye, you can notice that we're talking about 2D frames for now. In 3D frames, you would have two types of bending. You would have a bending around a local y-axis and a bending around the local z-axis. And even you would have a rotation around the local x-axis known as torsion. Is this foreshadowing for the next video? Well, nobody knows. We will see next week for that. Okay, so now we don't have this stuff. We have a 2D frame element. And of course, the local stiffness matrix using MATLAB, and I have provided you with a small script last time in the previous video. There's a script for MATLAB if you want to use it. It's going to be linked above. So from that script, I get the local stiffness matrix of the first element. Of course, I want to have the global stiffness matrix of the structure. So I need the transformation matrix. Now, please notice that, for example, here phi was 45 degrees. L is from Pythagoras. It's 30 square plus 30 square. Because, I mean, if this is 45, then your height is 30. All those things were given in the problem. To go to the transformation matrix, you have S or cosine, sine, negative sine, cosine. With a 45 degree, you would have this transformation matrix. Final step is to take the mathematics calculation and say T transpose KT to get the, this is like dash local, to get the global element stiffness matrix, and this is what happens here. T transpose K local T is your global stiffness matrix, and this is basically the result of multiplying the transposes and the transformation matrices with the local stiffness matrix. All right, so far so good. Rinse and repeat for element number 2. Element number 2 has a length of 40 feet. Notice we're using inches. Those are given, so well, rinse, repeat. That's the local stiffness matrix, that's the transformation matrix, and the quick note here is element number 2 goes from node number 2 to node number 3. So if something goes from node number 2 to node number 3, the local x-axis is going to be going to the right and the local y-axis is going to be going up. In other words, the local axes of element number 2 coincides with the global axis of the full structure, which means that transformation is needed. So why are we calculating the transformation matrix? Truth to be said, we didn't need to do this step. We could just have said local stiffness matrix is also the global stiffness matrix. But well, since we are going through steps that, because you have a computer program, it will not be checking that. Well, you can see that the transformation matrix is the identity matrix. You can see ones everywhere, meaning, well, an identity matrix is a matrix that will not change anything if it gets multiplied by another matrix. And if you look, well, if you multiply the local stiffness matrix by the transformation matrix, nothing of the values changes. Of course, now I need to assemble them. To assemble them, once again, I'm trying to be a little bit snappy here because we have done this multiple times in the past. I hope that you are pros. Now, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time to this series, please check out the playlist. I will link on the top right, which starts simple and goes in complexity. So with that being said, I tried to color code this time to make it a little bit more sensical. It seems that the teaching assistant's idea of having this little animation sparked my own idea. So thank you very much, my dear teaching assistant, who should now be writing something here, I guess. This is like next level foreshadowing. Now, what we see here is this is the stiffness matrix of element number 1. That, of course, it ends here. You can see this is the box. And that's the stiffness matrix of element number 2. Now, you can see me highlighting some colors here. First of all, when you add those two stiffness matrices together, you get the structural stiffness matrix. You can notice that I put an orange block around some values on both stiffness matrices. I put an orange block because the values here in element number 1 correspond to the interaction between node number 2 and node number 2. And since node number 2, as you can see here in the structure, is a shared node, it will exist also in element number 2. You can see this block also being the interaction between node number 2 and node number 2. So following this logic, I should be adding those values together, like this with this, this with this, this with this. I should be adding the two matrices together. And that's why I put an orange box here and an orange box here, so that I can help you remember what is happening and why it is happening. So of course now I should have a big matrix. When I add those two matrices together, element number 1 and 2, I would have a big matrix where I have nodes number 1, number 2, and number 3 in both the rows and the columns. Now, why do you see dashed lines here for the first row, second row, third row, and the first column, second column, third column? Why do those lines exist? Well, the idea is simple. The lines have a red color, and you can see that I put a red box around node number 1. Node number 1 is fixed, meaning it doesn't allow any movement in X, it doesn't allow any movement in Y, and it doesn't allow any rotation. This means that I can condense out those first, second, third rows and columns, because the first row and column corresponds to U1, which is the movement in X. The second row and column corresponds to V1, and the third row and column corresponds to Phi1 or Theta1, which means, of course, those are zeros, so I can eliminate them. Similarly, you see me eliminate the last one before and one before rows and columns. The reason, well, they are in blue. The reason is because node number 3 is in blue. So if you add those two together, you get those values. Now, those values are in pounds. If you want to see the values in the book, you have to divide by 1,000, because I used pounds here in my calculation. But if you want to use kilopounds or kips, you would have to divide by 1,000. So the values you get here, if you divide by 1,000, you get those values which correspond to the book. You have your forces, but wait, how do they get those forces? Just to remind you that the force vector is going to equal the nodal forces plus the equivalent forces, the equivalent nodal forces. The equivalent nodal forces exist because I have this. And notice that no nodal forces exist. There is no force on the node. Yes, here exists nodal forces, but those are the reactions, and you will not see them here. You don't see them because they got eliminated with the first, second, third row. Okay, so I have a 3 by 3 matrix, and I can calculate this. Even a normal calculator can calculate that. Solving it, you find your displacements. U2 is this, V12 is this, and Phi2 is this. Just to understand, This was our structure with a fixed support here and a fixed support here. It seems that it's gonna move in the X a little bit, it's gonna move down a little bit, and it's gonna rotate clockwise a little bit, which kind of makes sense because I'm expecting the deflection shape to look kind of like this, to be honest. So this node moving to the right, down, and clockwise seems to align with my intuition of how the deflection should look like. Okay, now I have my low global displacement, which means that for the structure, for the entire structure, the displacement vector for the entire structure looks like this: 0, 0, 0, and then the three values just got, those three values, and then another three zeros, 0, 0, 0. If you are interested in the reactions, you can basically multiply this displacement vector by the global stiffness matrix to find the global force matrix, a force vector. Don't forget to remove the equivalent nodal forces before you say that those are your reactions. I'm not interested in the reactions today, so I will leave this step for you. My mission today is to draw the shear force diagram and bending width diagram of the structure, which means I need the local displacements and forces for each element. The global displacements for member number 1, or element number 1, is D, which is 0, 0, 0, and the three values just got. Now I put a transpose here because I didn't want to write them in a column vector to save space. Like if I draw like this, I will not have space on my slide. So I wrote them in a horizontal vector and transposed them so that the viewer knows that it's a vertical vector. This is the global deflection or displacement vector of the element. Now if you want to find the local displacement of the element, all you have to do is to take the global displacement vector and multiply it by the transformation matrix to get the local displacement. That's what I have done here. Of course, the transformation matrix is shown in one of my slides, and that's the reason why I love the approach of finding stiffness local and transformation and multiplying, because I need those elements in my calculations of the local forces. Since we have our local displacements, I can multiply by the local stiffness matrix to find the local forces, which are shown here. Notice how it's very beneficial to find the local stiffness matrix and the transformation matrix and find the global stiffness matrix from this equation rather than using the abomination of the big matrix, because you can reuse those elements again in your local calculations and post-processing. This is for element number 1. What about element number 2? It would follow a similar path in which you would say the displacement of element number 2 is going to be the three values you calculated and triple zeros. Of course, you're wondering, why did it start here with triple zeros and why did it end here with triple zeros? The answer being, element number 1 connects node 1 with node 2. Those are the displacements of node 2, and the displacements of node 1 are zeros. Element number 2 connects node 2 with node 3. Those are the displacements of node 2, and zeros are for 3 because 3 is fixed. Of course, since we have our global displacement, I multiplied by the transformation matrix of element number 2. And if you remember, it was once. And then I can find the local forces by multiplying by the local stiffness matrix. Fantastic. This would give you this. Now the last step is to draw the diagrams for the element. How would I do that? Well, let me show you. This is for element number 1. Element number 1 is inclined. Now those are the forces based on the finite element method sign convention. Notice that this force is a compressive force, and this force is a compressive force. And notice that there is a difference between the finite element method sign convention versus the beam sign convention. This is your beam sign convention, and this is your finite element method sign convention. So you see, it's always in the positive x, positive y, and counterclockwise moment. Now to look here is basically a compressive force. Although it has a value of positive here, or whatever, you can see me using negative here because compression is against tension. According to the sign convention, has a negative value. This is also compression, so it also has a negative value. The normal force doesn't change, which makes sense because there is no forces inside that bar. There are no forces in the middle. For the shear force diagram, I would have to take the two values here. This value is against the shear force diagram's convention. It should be going up, but this one is going locally down, so negative. And here, this should be going down, the shear force. However, this is going locally up, so negative. Meaning that there is no change in the shear force, which makes sense because there are no forces in the middle of the bar. Finally, for moment, you have a value in the beginning which goes clockwise, which coincides with the positive moment in the beam convention, so positive value. And then you have a moment that goes clockwise again, but in the real beam convention should be going counterclockwise. So it's against the correct direction, so that's why I have a negative value. With that being said, you have your shear force diagram and bending moment diagrams, and axial force diagrams for element number 1. Repeating the process for element number 2, things might get tricky. For the axial force, you have compression, compression, and that's why you have negative, negative. For the shear force diagram, you know that the value here goes positive, so it goes up in the direction of the shear force. You can see the shear force here going up, so it's positive. And this one goes up, although the shear force diagram should be going down here, so it's negative. Now, I know it's connected with a line because there is a distributed force in the middle. And by virtue of statics, I know that there is a line. Imagine, in another world, this is the element you have. Imagine you have this element. You have all the forces here, the same forces. You have the same values here. All the values are the same here. So the values on the nodes, those values are the same here. But the difference is you have a force here. How would the shear force diagram look? I can argue that the shear force diagram would look like this. 17420 goes constant, drops down because you have a force going down, then goes constant, and that's your shear force diagram at negative 255, whatever. So the reason why I drew it in a line is because statics. Of course, using similar triangles, the distance x at 0 shear is going to be this value. A cool way of doing this is to take the shear value and divide it by the load value if the shear and load are linear. 17420 divided by 1000 because kips. Okay, for the bending moment diagram, I know this value here because result and convention. But to be honest, I'm not sure if the moment diagram goes all the way up to the positive or, for example, goes like this and never dips up. We don't know this just from the results. How would I know what the moment diagram looks like? I would have to find the area of this triangle that I'm hatching now and add it to this to find the maximum moment here. If it's positive, this means moment diagram goes up. If it's negative, it means moment diagram never went up. It's significant to know this because in reinforced concrete, positive moments and negative moments are totally different. I'm drawing negative down and positive up. In some textbooks, it seems a strange thing that in structural analysis textbooks, negative down, positive up. In reinforced design textbooks, positive is down, negative is up. Finally, if I had this beam, and I wanted to draw the moment diagram for it, it would look like this. A value with negative here, a value with negative here. I would have a line like this, and then a line like this, because of the areas of the shear force diagram. Now, if the line goes up or stays down, I have no idea. It depends on the area of the shear force diagram. This is something cool, and you should be checking your statics to draw your moment diagram here. With that being said, this ends my example for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. This was like one of those deeper examples. You have not learned a lot of things new here, I know, which is a good thing, by the way, but at least you have seen the finite element method being used in a more practical way, not just a frame with a node load because we have distributed loads. With that being said, I want to give a huge inclined reinforced concrete frame sized shout out to our dear channel members whose names are going to be showing on the screen. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart, as their support to the channel via YouTube membership is priceless to me and helps me deliver the videos that you deserve. With that being said, I hope that you enjoyed the video and that it was beneficial for you. Of course, if you have enjoyed the video, then please like, share, comment, and subscribe, especially subscribing, because it helps increase the reach of my channel. This is the Civil Engineering Essentials channel, and we will catch you in the next video.